The city built for the sun is falling silent. Along the eastern bank of the Nile, palaces, temples, workshops, and painted houses stand beneath the cliffs of Akhetaten, the new capital raised by Pharaoh Akhenaten in devotion to the Aten. Only a few years earlier, this place had been the centre of an extraordinary royal experiment. Open courts flooded with sunlight replaced the shadowed sanctuaries of the older temples. Images of the king and his queen appeared everywhere, their long figures reaching toward the rays of the solar disk, receiving life through tiny hands extended from the sky. Nefertiti was not hidden behind her husband. She stood beside him, sometimes nearly equal in scale, performing rituals, presenting offerings, rewarding officials, and participating in scenes that gave her an authority rarely shown so openly for an Egyptian queen. Then, near the end of Akhenaten's reign, certainty breaks apart. The inscriptions become difficult to follow. Royal names change. Possible co-rulers appear and disappear. Within a few years, the capital is abandoned, the religious revolution is reversed, and Nefertiti slips beyond the secure reach of history. Her disappearance is made more unsettling by the familiarity of her face. Few people from the ancient world seem more recognizable. The painted limestone bust discovered at Amarna in 1912 has transformed Nefertiti into an almost modern presence, poised, symmetrical, and apparently untouched by the confusion surrounding her final years. Yet the face that survives so clearly belongs to a woman whose body, tomb, parents, death, and ultimate political position remain uncertain. Egypt left countless images of her, but no securely identified burial. It preserved her titles, yet failed to preserve an undisputed account of her end. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The search ahead begins with that contradiction, an ancient queen known across the world, and a historical individual whom science still cannot confidently locate among the dead. Nefertiti lives during one of the most unstable episodes of the 18th dynasty. Probably in the middle of the 14th century BCE, Egypt is wealthy, internationally connected, and accustomed to presenting its monarchy as eternal. Beneath that appearance, however, royal succession depends upon delicate networks of marriage, ancestry, priesthood, palace influence, and divine legitimacy. Akhenaten disrupts those networks when he promotes the Aten with unprecedented intensity and redirects royal patronage away from older cults, especially that of Amun. He establishes Akhetaten on ground he describes as belonging to no previous god or ruler. Nefertiti becomes inseparable from this transformed vision of kingship. Her image is not merely decorative. In some scenes, she performs actions associated with royal power, and her religious role seems essential to the sacred family gathered beneath the Aten's rays. What survives in the record suggests that she was far more than a ceremonial companion, although scholars still debate precisely how her authority operated. This importance makes the absence of a clear ending especially strange. Egyptian royal women did not always receive detailed biographies, and death notices were not preserved like modern public records. Even so, Nefertiti's case is exceptional because the later Amarna succession is itself so poorly understood. Akhenaten appears to have ruled for roughly 17 years, but the sequence around his death remains crowded with disputed names and incomplete monuments. A ruler called Smenkhkare appears briefly. Another royal identity, Neferneferuaten, is associated with female grammatical forms and epithets that have encouraged some scholars to connect this person with Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, soon renamed Tutankhamun. eventually occupies the throne while still very young, and Egypt begins its return to the traditional gods. These names do not form a neat procession. They overlap in ways that remain contested, and damaged inscriptions can support different reconstructions depending upon how their surviving traces are read. For many years, a simple story filled the gaps. Nefertiti was said to have disappeared around the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, perhaps because she died, lost favour, or was replaced. That narrative was attractive because it gave the mystery a clean turning point. It is no longer sustainable in that form. An inscription dated to Akhenaten's 16th regnal year identifies Nefertiti with the title Great Royal Wife, showing that she remained alive and publicly recognized much later than older reconstructions assumed. Instead of solving her disappearance, this evidence moves it closer to the final collapse of the Amarna court. She does not fade away in the middle of the reign. She remains present near its end, just before the record becomes most confused. The final years may have carried an atmosphere of uncertainty that the official art never admits. Egypt's temples and palaces continued to proclaim cosmic order, but the royal household had already experienced losses, and the succession appears unsettled. Akhenaten depended heavily upon the court and the religious program that created it. Once that program failed, the city had little reason to endure as a capital. Under Tutankhamun, royal administration moved away, traditional cults regained support, and the name of Amun returned to royal identity. Buildings at Amarna were left behind or dismantled. Stone blocks from Aegean temples were reused in later construction. Images were altered, names attacked, and the reigns associated with the religious upheaval were eventually excluded from official king lists. Akhenaten could be remembered indirectly as an enemy rather than honoured as a legitimate ancestor. Within such a political clean-up, the fate of one queen could easily become obscured. Yet erasure alone does not explain everything. Nefertiti may have died and been buried at Amarna before her remains were moved. She may have survived Akhenaten and adopted a royal name. She may have ruled briefly, either alone or within a contested succession. Her burial equipment may have been appropriated, altered, or redistributed during the return to older traditions. Her mummy may still lie in an undiscovered tomb, or it may already have been recovered under an anonymous archaeological label. Each possibility has been argued, but no single explanation fully accounts for all the surviving evidence. The problem is not a shortage of imaginative solutions. It is the absence of a decisive connection between a historical name and a physical body. That is where DNA enters the story, carrying a promise that is both powerful and easily misunderstood. Genetic evidence can reveal biological sex, close kinship, maternal or paternal relationships, and aspects of ancestry when enough authentic material survives. It can show that two mummies probably belong to the same family even when their coffins and inscriptions have been lost. But DNA does not preserve a person's name. A genetic profile cannot announce that a woman was called Nefertiti, held the title Great Royal Wife, or ruled as Neferneferuaten. To make that identification, science needs an anchor, a securely named relative, a well-documented burial context, an inscription tied convincingly to the body, or a combination of independent clues strong enough to exclude rival candidates. Ancient DNA can rebuild branches of a family tree, but if the names attached to those branches are uncertain, the tree remains suspended in darkness. The search for Nefertiti therefore begins before the laboratory and beyond the famous bust. It begins in a ruined capital where public images once made her seem almost omnipresent, in a royal chronology damaged by political reaction, and in tombs whose occupants were disturbed, relocated, or stripped of their identities. Her disappearance is not a single missing event waiting to be recovered. It is the result of several losses layered together: a collapsing religious order, an uncertain succession, deliberate historical suppression, ancient reuse of burial goods, and modern attempts to extract certainty from incomplete remains. Somewhere within those layers may be the Queen herself. But before science can decide whether it has found her, it must first understand who Nefertiti was when Egypt could still speak her name. To identify Nefertiti among Egypt's anonymous dead, it would help to possess a reliable family tree. Instead, history offers something far more difficult: a woman represented in extraordinary detail, surrounded by named relatives, yet lacking securely documented parents of her own. Her monuments reveal how the court wished her to be seen, not where she was born or whose daughter she was. Even her famous name has encouraged more certainty than it can support. Nefertiti is commonly translated as the beautiful one has come, and that phrase has sometimes been treated as evidence that she arrived from another land. Ancient Egyptian names, however, do not function like passports. Nothing in the name proves foreign birth, and no surviving document identifies her as a princess from Mitanni, Syria, or any other neighbouring kingdom. One popular suggestion connects her with Tutankhamun, a Mitannian princess sent to Egypt during the reign of Akhenaten's father, Amenhotep III. Tutankhamun is a real historical figure known from the diplomatic world preserved in the Amarna letters. Foreign royal marriages were an important part of Egyptian diplomacy, and a princess could receive an Egyptian name after entering the court. But no text says that Tutankhamun became Nefertiti, and no genetic evidence links the two identities. The resemblance ends at possibility. Another reconstruction places Nefertiti within an Egyptian elite family associated with the official A and his wife Tay. Tay carried a title identifying her as nurse of the great royal wife, while A later became pharaoh after Tutankhamun. These connections show proximity to Nefertiti, but they do not prove that A and Tay were her parents. A nurse could occupy an intimate and influential position without being the queen's biological mother. Nefertiti's omission of the title king's daughter has also attracted attention. Egyptian royal women frequently advertised royal ancestry when it strengthened their standing, so the absence may suggest that she was not born to a reigning pharaoh. Yet titles were selective, political, and dependent upon context. Their silence is not a birth certificate. She may have belonged to a high-ranking Egyptian family, perhaps one already close to the palace, or she may have had a royal connection expressed in some form that has not survived. The evidence remains incomplete, and every proposed pedigree contains assumptions. That uncertainty becomes crucial when DNA enters the discussion, because a genetic sequence can only test a historical genealogy that has first been reconstructed from names, titles, monuments, and securely identified relatives. If the genealogy is uncertain, a genetic match may establish kinship without telling scholars which historical person occupies which branch. Nefertiti appears as the principal wife of Amenhotep IV, the king who later takes the name Akhenaten. The exact date of their marriage is unknown, but she is prominent from early in his reign. As the court's religious language changes, her own name expands to Neferneferuaten Nefertiti, linking her directly to the Aten and expressing the beauty or perfection associated with the solar deity. She bears the title Great Royal Wife, but this familiar English phrase understates the ceremonial force of the Egyptian office. Her other titles describe her as great in favour, great in praise, mistress of Upper and Lower Egypt, lady of the two lands, and beloved of the king. Such formulas were not casual compliments. They positioned her within a sacred monarchy in which political authority, fertility, divine order, and public ritual were closely entangled. The royal couple had 6 securely attested daughters: Meritatan, Meketaten, Ankesenpaten, Neferneferuaten Tasherit, Neferneferua, and Setepenre. Their names and appearances help Egyptologists follow changes within the court, but they do not provide a complete record of the household. No surviving inscription securely identifies a son born to Nefertiti. Tutankhamun's relationship to her is especially important because modern retellings often call him her son, as if the matter were settled. The available genetic study identifies Tutankhamun's mother as the unidentified woman known as the KV35 younger lady. While no inscription securely calls Tutankhamun the son of Nefertiti, if the younger lady were someday proven to be Nefertiti, the relationship would follow. At present, however, that historical identification has not been demonstrated. Nefertiti may have been his stepmother, another close relative, a powerful figure within the same royal household, or his biological mother only if several debated identifications prove correct. What is not in doubt is the exceptional visibility she possessed. On temple walls and the small limestone building blocks known as talatat, Nefertiti appears offering to the Aten, shaking ritual instruments, presenting sacred goods, and standing beside the king beneath the descending rays of the sun. At Karnak, before the court transferred fully to Akhetaten, structures associated with the new solar worship gave the queen an unusually extensive role. One sanctuary, commonly called the Hut Ben Ben, appears to have been especially connected with her. In some images she performs without Akhenaten immediately beside her, suggesting that her ritual power was not merely borrowed for an occasional ceremonial appearance. Her figure could embody the female component required within the new divine order, complementing the king while helping the royal family replace functions once distributed among numerous traditional gods and goddesses. Some representations go further. Nefertiti is shown in poses associated with kingship, including scenes in which she raises a weapon over foreign enemies. These are symbolic images of royal domination rather than records of an observed event, but their significance remains striking. Egyptian queens could wield considerable authority, and earlier royal women had already served as regents or adopted kingly identities. Even within that tradition, Nefertiti's iconography is unusually forceful. She wears a range of crowns, including the tall, flat-topped blue crown now inseparable from her modern image. She appears at the window of appearance, participates in public reward ceremonies, rides in royal chariots, and occupies space in official compositions with a visual weight approaching that of Akhenaten. Scholars still debate whether these scenes reflect independent political authority, a unique theological partnership, or both. The Amarna artists also surrounded the royal family with images that feel startlingly intimate. Nefertiti sits with her daughters, holds them close, and shares gestures of affection beneath the Aten's rays. Akhenaten and the queen appear together in scenes whose elongated bodies, narrow limbs, prominent torsos, and expressive poses differ sharply from earlier royal conventions. These images are sometimes mistaken for candid portraits or evidence of specific medical conditions. They are neither simple photographs nor neutral anatomical records. Amarna art communicated a new theology through the royal body, emphasizing the family as the living point of contact between the Aten and Egypt. Individual likeness may be present, but it is shaped by artistic purpose. a sculpted face cannot establish ancestry, disease, or genetic identity merely because it looks realistic to modern eyes. The best-known face emerges from the workshop of the sculptor Thutmose at Amarna. The painted bust preserves delicate modelling, a long neck, carefully balanced features, and one finished inlaid eye, while the other eye was left without its inlay. It may have served as a workshop model, although its precise purpose remains debated. Its survival creates a subtle illusion, because the image seems individual and psychologically present. The viewer feels that Nefertiti herself has been encountered. In reality, the bust tells far more about elite artistic practice and royal presentation than it does about her biological profile. A facial reconstruction made from an unidentified mummy could resemble this sculpture and still fail to prove identity, especially when both ancient artists and modern reconstructors make interpretive choices. Behind the celebrated face, then, stands a queen whose documented power is clearer than her ancestry. She is a wife, mother of 6 named daughters, ritual partner of Akhenaten, and central figure in the visual language of Amarna. She may also have been connected to an influential Egyptian family, and may eventually have assumed still greater authority. But those possibilities remain under investigation. Her prominence did not arise in an ordinary court. It was created within a deliberate transformation of Egyptian kingship, one in which the old relationship between ruler, gods, temples, and people was being rewritten beneath an open sky. To understand why Nefertiti became so visible, and why her identity later became so difficult to recover, the world built around the Aten must be seen as more than an eccentric religious experiment. It was a reorganization of power, and the queen stood close to its center. The new order did not arrive in a single proclamation. When Amenhotep IV inherited the throne, he entered a religious world crowded with ancient powers. Amun held enormous prestige at Thebes, but Egypt also belonged to Ra, Ptah, Osiris, Hathor, Thoth, Horus, and hundreds of local deities whose cults were woven into farming, childbirth, healing, burial, administration, and the rhythm of the Nile. The Aten already existed within Egyptian solar religion as the visible disk of the sun. Amenhotep IV did not invent it. What changed was the scale of royal attention. During the early years of his reign, the Aten moved from one expression of solar divinity toward the dominant center of the monarchy, while the king and Nefertiti emerged as the indispensable human figures through whom its power reached the land. At Thebes, Amenhotep IV began building enormous Aten complexes near the territory of Amun. Their architecture announced a different experience of worship. Traditional Egyptian temples often led inward through pylons, courts, halls, and increasingly restricted spaces until the deity's cult image rested in a dark sanctuary. Aten temples opened upward. Their courts contained rows of offering tables exposed to sunlight. Because the god was manifested not principally through a statue hidden in darkness, but through the disk shining overhead. Bread, meat, vegetables, flowers, incense, beer, wine, and other goods were displayed beneath the rays. The arrangement was visually expansive, but access to divine power remained tightly controlled. The Aten shone upon the world, yet the official theology placed the royal family between that universal light and ordinary humanity. The speed of construction at Thebes was helped by small standardized stone blocks now called talatat. These could be carried and set more quickly than the larger masonry traditionally used for monumental walls. Their convenience later served an entirely different purpose. When the Aten temples were dismantled, thousands of talatat were reused as hidden filling within later structures. The religious revolution was broken into pieces and buried inside the monuments of its opponents. Modern researchers have spent decades photographing and arranging these scattered blocks, attempting to reconstruct scenes that were deliberately disassembled. It is a fitting survival for the Amarna age the evidence exists, but rarely in its original order. Around the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten, expressing his relationship with the Aten. He then founded a new capital on the east bank of the Nile at a place now known as Amarna. Boundary stele carved into the surrounding cliffs declared the territory of Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. The location was presented as belonging to no previous god, goddess, ruler, or official. Whether this language should be read as literal historical description or royal ideology, it framed the city as a sacred beginning. Palaces, administrative buildings, temples, villas, workers' settlements, roads, gardens, workshops, and tombs rose with remarkable speed across the desert plain. The court did not merely adopt a new cult. It physically moved away from the old sacred centers and created a landscape organized around the king's revelation. Life in Akhetaten remained more complicated than its official theology suggests. The city was filled with government officials, artisans, laborers, soldiers, priests, servants, traders, and families whose daily needs could not be reduced to royal hymns. Excavations have recovered household objects connected with traditional protective deities, indicating that older religious practices did not vanish from private life. People still worried about health, fertility, food, work, and the dangers they believed surrounded ordinary existence. Even while monumental art elevated the Aten, familiar divine figures could survive inside homes. The transformation was therefore powerful but incomplete. Royal institutions could command temple walls and official ritual more easily than they could erase habits carried in memory. Scholars still debate whether Akhenaten's religion should be called monotheism. The term can imply a systematic denial that any other divine beings exist, while the surviving evidence may fit more closely with exclusive royal devotion, monolatry, or a radical concentration of worship upon one god. What is clear is that the campaign intensified. The name and images of Amun were attacked on monuments, sometimes even within personal names. References to multiple gods were suppressed in certain contexts, and the Aten's own formal name was enclosed in cartouches like a king's. Its theology also changed over time, reducing earlier connections with traditional solar deities. The divine world was being narrowed, and the royal family occupied the space left behind. Nefertiti's importance grows within this system because the Aten religion depends upon a carefully constructed sacred household. Akhenaten and Nefertiti are repeatedly shown beneath the rays with their daughters, forming an earthly family through which divine life enters Egypt. The queen performs offerings and appears in settings once occupied by goddesses or by the king alone. Her visibility may reflect a theological need for a female counterpart within the royal structure, but theology and politics cannot be cleanly separated in ancient Egypt. By becoming essential to the ritual order, Nefertiti also became essential to the public presentation of government. Her elevated position was strengthened by the revolution, yet it was also made dangerously dependent upon its survival. The economic consequences reached far beyond images. Temples were not simply houses of prayer. They controlled land, workshops, storage facilities, personnel, livestock, and flows of agricultural wealth. Redirecting royal favour toward the Aten altered access to resources and prestige. Officials who prospered under the new order built elaborate tombs in the cliffs around Akhetaten, and filled them with scenes praising the royal family. Careers became attached to the king's religious vision. Old priestly institutions lost influence, although the exact scale and pace of these changes remained difficult to measure. The surviving record was produced by elites who had reasons to display loyalty, so apparent unanimity should not be mistaken for universal enthusiasm. Beyond Egypt, diplomacy continued through envoys, marriages, gifts, and correspondence with rulers across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East. The Amarna letters preserve requests for gold, disputes over status, warnings about regional conflict, and the small indignities of international politics. Some later accounts portray Akhenaten as so absorbed by religion that he neglected the empire entirely, but the evidence does not support such a simple verdict. The letters reveal pressure and uncertainty, yet they also show an administration still conducting foreign affairs. No single explanation fully accounts for the political changes of the period, and it is risky to make the Aten revolution responsible for every problem visible near the end of the reign. The deeper danger was structural. Akhenaten concentrated sacred legitimacy around himself, his god, his city, and his household. This gave the new system dramatic coherence while the king lived, but few independent foundations upon which it could endure after him. The Aten possessed temples and estates, yet its public identity remained bound to the royal family. Akhenaten was impressive, but newly built. Officials were loyal, but many had risen through the order they were praising. The old gods, old cities, and old priesthoods had centuries of embedded memory behind them. When succession became uncertain, the revolution's greatest strength, its focus upon a single royal vision, became its greatest weakness. This helps explain why Nefertiti's later identity is so difficult to separate from the collapse around her. If she remained great royal wife, she was one of the final pillars of Akhenaten's system. If she adopted a kingly identity, she may have attempted to preserve or stabilize it. If she died before the restoration, her burial belonged to a court that would soon lose control of its own monuments. Any name associated too closely with the Aten could later be altered, omitted, or repurposed. The destruction that followed was not perfectly organized, and it did not remove every trace. It produced something more confusing: fragments left in walls, titles detached from bodies, altered coffins, reused objects, and royal names that seem to change as the light of Akhenaten begins to fade. Within those fragments, the last securely dated appearance of Nefertiti waits near the end of Akhenaten's reign, later than generations of scholars once believed. For much of the 20th century, Nefertiti's story was made to end around Akhenaten's 12th regnal year. Her apparent decline seemed to coincide with changes inside the royal family, and the lack of an obvious later record invited explanations. Perhaps she had died during an epidemic. Perhaps she had been disgraced. Perhaps another woman had replaced her. The theory became so familiar that her disappearance in year 12 was often repeated as though an Egyptian document had recorded it. No such document existed. The date was an argument built from absence, and absence at Amarna is treacherous. Monuments were dismantled, names were altered, and countless blocks were removed from their original settings. What looked like the end of a life could simply be the edge of the surviving record. Nefertiti is clearly present in the great ceremonial scenes of year 12 when foreign delegations bring tribute to Akhenaten. The court is displayed at the height of its confidence. The royal family appears beneath the Aten, while representatives of foreign lands present goods before the king and queen. These images are formal statements of abundance and international order, not neutral reports on the health of the empire, but they establish Nefertiti's public position. After this point, evidence becomes more difficult to arrange. Certain royal women vanish from inscriptions. Names and images are replaced. The deaths of members of the royal household are represented in the royal tomb. Earlier scholars attempted to turn these fragments into a tidy sequence, but the fragments refused to remain tidy for long. The decisive correction came from a place far less glamorous than a palace or royal burial chamber. Across the Nile from Amarna, at Deir Abu Hinis, ancient quarry workers cut into the limestone cliffs to obtain stone for the city's monuments. Among the marks left inside the quarry is a dated hieratic inscription, written in ink rather than carved as a grand public proclamation. It records year 16 of Akhenaten's reign and names the great royal wife, his beloved mistress of the two lands, Neferneferuaten Nefertiti. The text is administrative and practical in character, connected with work being conducted for the royal building program. Its value comes precisely from its lack of theatrical ambition. It is a dated trace of the functioning court, and it places Nefertiti alive in official royal language close to the end of Akhenaten's reign. A quarry graffito may seem a modest object upon which to overturn decades of interpretation. Yet archaeology often changes through small evidence that refuses to fit an elegant story. The inscription does not reveal Nefertiti's private thoughts, health, or political plans. It does not say whether she later ruled. It does not identify her tomb. What it does is eliminate the confident claim that she disappeared from power in year 12. 4 years after that supposed vanishing, she still carries the title Great Royal Wife. Akhenaten probably ruled for approximately 17 years, although exact chronological details remain debated. Nefertiti therefore stands very near the final boundary of his reign, not in the distant middle of it. This survival transforms the question of what happened next. If she died before Akhenaten, there was little time between her final attestation and his own death. If she outlived him, she entered a succession crisis in which her experience and ritual authority may have made her politically indispensable. If she adopted a new name, her apparent disappearance may reflect transformation rather than death. The evidence remains incomplete, and the surviving records do not provide a continuous account. The year 16 inscription is a fixed point surrounded by darkness. It tells historians where Nefertiti still was, but not where she went. Akhenaten had intended the eastern cliffs at Akhetaten to receive the royal dead. Boundary inscriptions describing the foundation of the city included plans for the king's own burial and for those of Nefertiti and their eldest daughter, Mereteten, deep within a remote desert valley. Workmen cut what is now called the Royal Tomb of Amarna. Its descending passages, halls, side chambers, and decorated walls were meant to serve a royal family whose theology had moved away from many traditional funerary conventions without abandoning the need for a protected afterlife. Scenes show the royal household mourning within the light of the Aten, while fragments of burial equipment suggest that preparations were made for more than one member of the family. The tomb does not provide the intact conclusion those plans seem to promise. It was entered, damaged, and stripped in antiquity. Reliefs were attacked, objects broken, and royal remains removed or destroyed. Fragments associated with Akhenaten indicate that he was probably buried there initially. Although his body may later have been transferred, Nefertiti's planned place within the royal burial landscape is known from the foundation declarations, but no secure evidence proves that she was actually interred in the tomb. A plan written into stone can establish intention, not completion. Political circumstances may have changed before her death. or her remains may have been moved when Akhetaten was abandoned. Small objects linked with royal names create additional possibilities without closing the case. Burial equipment could be prepared before death, altered for a different owner, or reused during a hurried succession. Coffins, canopic objects, jewellery, and figurines were valuable both materially and ritually. In a stable reign, inscriptions tied an object to a person. In the disordered years after Akhenaten, names could be erased and replaced, leaving traces of more than one identity on the same piece. This practice later becomes central to arguments about the bodies found in Theban tombs. It also warns against assuming that an object bearing Nefertiti's name must once have rested beside her mummy, or that a mummy found with another person's equipment must be that equipment's original owner. Akhetaten itself began to empty not long after the royal transition. Administrative life shifted away. Stone was removed for use elsewhere, and desert sand entered spaces once maintained by palace labour. The city was not erased completely. Mud brick walls survived low beneath the ground. Rubbish accumulated in abandoned rooms, and cemeteries preserved the lives of ordinary inhabitants. Modern excavations continued to recover pottery, tools, food remains, textiles, skeletal evidence, and traces of neighbourhoods that reveal how rapidly the capital was built and how unevenly its people experienced royal ambition. Recent fieldwork has expanded knowledge of houses, officials, workshops, and non-royal burials, but it has not produced Nefertiti's mummy or a genetic sample securely belonging to her. The contrast is almost severe. Archaeology can reconstruct what residents ate, where craftsmen worked, how streets developed, and which pigments artists kept inside their workshops. It can recover the fingerprints of labourers from mud bricks and the discarded fragments of statues from sculptors' rooms. Yet the queen who dominated the city's official imagery remains physically absent. Her last secure appearance survives not on a throne, but in an inked record inside a limestone quarry. It confirms that she remained great royal wife in year 16, and forces every later theory to begin from that fact. After the graffito, royal identity becomes fluid. Names once assumed to belong to separate individuals begin to overlap. Feminine endings appear within kingly inscriptions. Objects are recut. Epithets are changed. And the brief figures between Akhenaten and Tutankhamun refuse to settle into an uncontested order. Nefertiti may have died as queen and vanished because her burial was lost. But another possibility now carries greater weight than it once did. The great royal wife may not have disappeared at all. She may have stepped across the boundary between queen and king, leaving behind one title only because she had taken another. Crossing from queen to king was possible in ancient Egypt, but it required more than influence. Kingship possessed its own names, crowns, rituals, and grammatical identity. A ruler normally adopted a royal titulary that expressed divine legitimacy and the condition of the two lands. Personal identity could become partially concealed behind throne names, especially when monuments were damaged or altered. This is exactly what happens after Akhenaten. The surviving inscriptions preserve several royal names, some resembling one another so closely that earlier researchers combined individuals who many specialists now separate. At the centre of the confusion stands Pharaoh Neferneferuaten, a ruler whose inscriptions sometimes contain feminine forms, and whose identity may provide the missing bridge between Nefertiti the queen and a pharaoh who governed in the final Amarna years. The first essential distinction is between Neferneferuaten and Smenkhare. Both are associated with versions of the throne name Ankheperora. which helped create the impression that they were one person or successive identities of the same ruler. Smenkhare appears with the fuller royal name Unkeperua Smenkhare Jesakeperu and is generally treated as a male king. In the tomb of the official Moriah II at Amarna, Smenkhare is shown with Meritatan, Nefertiti's eldest daughter, who carries the title Great Royal Wife. The scene is incomplete and the reign appears to have been brief, but it gives Smenkhare a distinct position within the royal household. Neferneferuaten presents a different pattern. The name appears with feminine grammatical elements in several inscriptions, indicating that this ruler was a woman, rather than simply a king represented with unusual artistic features. Certain epithets describe the ruler in a relationship to Akhenaten, including language often translated as beneficial or effective for her husband, and references to being beloved of Akhenaten under his royal names. These clues strongly suggest a senior royal woman closely connected to him. Nefertiti is an obvious candidate. She had already adopted Neferneferuaten as part of her expanded name, remained Great Royal Wife in year 16, and possessed an iconographic and ritual status that could prepare the court to accept her in kingly form. Egypt had precedents for a woman assuming full pharaonic authority. Sobekneferu had ruled at the end of the 12th dynasty, and Hatshepsut had occupied the throne earlier in the 18th dynasty. Hatshepsut gradually adopted the complete language and regalia of kingship while retaining evidence of her female identity. Nefertiti would not have been attempting something unimaginable. Her situation, however, was different. Hatshepsut ruled within a long-established religious order and presented herself through traditional gods, especially Amun. Nefertiti's legitimacy was bound to a revolution already facing an uncertain future. If she became king, she may have done so as Akhenaten's co-ruler, as his successor, or during a short overlap designed to secure the dynasty. The chronological evidence is too damaged to select confidently among these arrangements. The case for Nefertiti is compelling but not conclusive. Meritatan has also been proposed as Neferneferuaten. As the eldest daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, she held high status and later appears as Great Royal Wife beside Smenkhare. Other reconstructions introduce additional royal women or rearrange the sequence of the names. The problem is not that any candidate fits perfectly. It is that each explanation must account for titles, feminine grammar, epithets, altered inscriptions, burial equipment, and the uncertain order of several short reigns. Scholars still debate which details carry the greatest weight. Nefertiti fits the name and the relationship to Akhenaten particularly well, but the surviving texts never provide the sentence historians want Nefertiti became King Neferneferuaten. The likely distinction between Smenkhare and Neferneferuaten also creates several possible sequences. Smenkhare may have served briefly as Akhenaten's co-regent and died before him. Neferneferuaten may then have ruled afterward. The order may have been reversed. One or both may have overlapped with Akhenaten. Regnal dates attached to these rulers are scarce, and later destruction removed the monuments that might have clarified the transition. A dated inscription associated with the year 3 under an Unkeperua has been connected with Neferneferuaten and includes renewed reference to Amun, perhaps suggesting that movement toward religious restoration began before Tutankhamun. Yet the identity and implications remain disputed. The final Amarna court may have adapted more pragmatically than its earlier monuments imply. Objects recovered from Tutankhamun's tomb add another layer. Some of his burial goods appear to have been made originally for another royal person and then altered. This is not surprising in a period of short reigns and disrupted funerary preparations. Royal equipment required enormous labour. rare materials, and specialized workshops. It could be reassigned when a burial plan changed. Several scholars have argued that items in Tutankhamun's tomb were first prepared for Neferneferuaten, and some have gone further by proposing that parts of the famous burial assemblage belonged specifically to Nefertiti. The details remain contested. Recut names can show reuse, but identifying the original owner requires careful reading of damaged traces, and the name Neferneferuaten does not by itself settle whether that ruler was Nefertiti. Even the gold mask has entered the debate. Suggestions that it was originally created for a female ruler rely upon features of its construction, pierced ears, and possible changes to inscriptions or facial elements. Other specialists dispute these interpretations or note that the evidence allows different explanations. The mask cannot be treated as Nefertiti's lost portrait simply because the idea is visually attractive. What survives in the record suggests widespread adaptation of burial equipment, but the path from reused object to named queen is rarely direct. In the Amarna aftermath, valuable things were more durable than the identities attached to them. A further echo of the succession survives outside Egypt in Hittite records. They describe an Egyptian royal widow who asked the Hittite king to send one of his sons for her to marry because she had no suitable husband. The prince was dispatched but never reached the Egyptian throne. The widow is called Dakamunzu in the Hittite account, probably a rendering of an Egyptian royal title rather than a personal name. She's been identified variously as Ankhesenamun after Tutankhamun's death, Nefertiti after Akhenaten, or another royal woman. The episode reveals the desperation that could accompany a broken succession, but its date and protagonist remain uncertain. It cannot securely place Nefertiti on the throne. This strongest argument remains cumulative. Nefertiti was alive near the end of Akhenaten's reign. She already carried the name Neferneferuaten. She had performed king-like rituals, stood at the theological centre of the Aten cult, and possessed years of public authority. A female pharaoh named Neferneferuaten appears within the same narrow historical interval, and uses language linking her closely with Akhenaten. These facts make the identification plausible and, for many scholars, persuasive. They do not make it proven. A plausible historical reconstruction is not the same as an inscribed identification, just as a genetic relationship is not the same as a personal name. If Nefertiti did rule, her kingship was brief and politically fragile. It left no secure monumental tomb, no intact temple program, and no undisputed body. The restoration that followed had little reason to preserve the memory of a ruler who embodied the Amarna order. Whether she died as great royal wife or as Pharaoh Neferneferuaten, the institutions that once displayed her image were dismantled. Her city was abandoned, her god was rejected, and later kings rebuilt legitimacy by presenting the entire episode as a rupture that Egypt had survived. The woman may have reached the throne at the exact moment when the throne beneath her was changing its meaning. The return did not begin with a sudden march against Akhenaten. It unfolded through names, appointments, temple income, and the quiet movement of court personnel away from a capital whose sacred purpose had depended upon Akhenaten. The ruler who emerges securely after the obscure succession is Tutankhamun. His name invokes the living image of the Aten, and his marriage to Ankhesenpeten, one of Nefertiti's daughters, places him within the Amarna royal household. Soon, both names change. Tutankhaten becomes Tutankhamun, and Ankhesenpeten becomes Ankhesenamun. Amun has returned not only to public worship but to the identities of the king and queen. The change was more than symbolic. A major royal inscription, commonly called the Restoration Stela, describes temples in disorder, sanctuaries neglected, and the gods no longer answering the land. It presents Tutankhamun as the ruler who restores divine images, renews priesthoods, rebuilds shrines, and returns wealth to traditional cults. Like most royal declarations, it is also political messaging. The description of universal collapse may exaggerate conditions in order to magnify the new reign's achievement, yet the direction is unmistakable. The monarchy no longer defines Egypt through exclusive devotion to the Aten. It rebuilds legitimacy by repairing relations with the gods whom Akhenaten had diminished or attacked. The court shifts away from Akhenaten, with Memphis again becoming a major center of royal administration and Thebes regaining its religious importance. The abandonment is rapid by the standards of an ancient city, but not instantaneous. Some officials, workers, and residents may have remained for a time. Workshops still had equipment, houses still offered shelter, and fields along the Nile did not vanish when the palace departed. Even so, the flow of resources that sustained the capital weakened dramatically. A purpose-built royal city without its king, court, and privileged cult had little chance of maintaining its former scale. Rooms were emptied, valuable materials removed, and once busy districts began to return to dust. Akhenaten had been razed quickly, and much of it was built in mud brick. Walls could survive in the dry climate, but roofs collapsed, wooden elements disappeared, and wind-blown sand entered courtyards and streets. Stone was a different matter. Limestone blocks represented labour already completed, and later builders had no reason to leave them unused in an abandoned city. Temples and palaces were dismantled systematically. Blocks were transported to other sites, or broken down for reuse. The city's sacred architecture became a quarry, just as older monuments had sometimes supplied material for newer ones. Political rejection and practical recycling worked together. The same fate overtook the Aten temples at Thebes. Their small talatat blocks were especially convenient as construction fill. Under later kings, thousands were placed inside pylons and other monumental structures, hidden from view. The walls celebrating Akhenaten and Nefertiti disappeared into the architecture of the restored religious order. Their concealment unintentionally preserved painted and carved surfaces that might otherwise have weathered away. When modern archaeologists recovered these blocks, they found pieces of offerings, palaces, chariots, officials, royal daughters, Aten-rays, and Nefertiti herself. The attempt to dismantle the revolution created an enormous broken archive. Erasure was selective, uneven, and extended across reigns. Tutankhamun's government reversed policy but did not necessarily conduct the most systematic campaign against every Amarna name. I, who followed him, had served within the earlier court and briefly maintained continuity while presenting himself through restored traditions. Horemheb, the military ruler who eventually took the throne, pursued a more thorough rewriting of the recent past. He had no direct royal ancestry to advertise and benefited from portraying himself as the restorer of order after a period of disruption. Monuments of Tutankhamun and I could be appropriated. The succession between Amenhotep III and Horemheb was compressed, allowing Horemheb to absorb regnal years and achievements that had belonged to rulers he wished to eclipse. Later official king lists omitted Akhenaten and the short-lived Amarna successors. Even Tutankhamun and A could disappear from the approved sequence. Ramesside references treated Akhenaten as a condemned figure, sometimes avoiding his name and identifying him indirectly as the offender or enemy associated with Akhenaten. This was not modern censorship conducted through a single archive. It was a long process expressed through recarved inscriptions, altered cartouches, dismantled monuments, and official genealogies. Because Egyptian royal names were believed to sustain existence and memory, attacking a name carried ritual as well as political force. Nefertiti's position within this campaign is difficult to measure. Her name was inseparable from Akhenaten's religious program, yet she does not always appear to have been targeted in exactly the same manner or at the same time. If she became Neferneferuaten, her kingly monuments may have been recut for successors, leaving only faint traces beneath later inscriptions. If she died as queen, images of her could have vanished simply because the temples containing them were demolished. The loss of evidence does not require a special conspiracy directed at her alone. The entire framework that preserved her public identity was being taken apart. This dismantling also affected burial. Royal tombs were not isolated monuments untouched by political change. They depended upon priests, offerings, guards, administrators, and continued recognition of the dead person's legitimacy. The royal tomb at Amarna became vulnerable once the court left. If Akhenaten, Nefertiti, or other members of the household had been buried there, later officials faced a choice. They could leave the bodies in a discredited and poorly protected city, destroy them, or transfer them to a safer royal cemetery. Egypt has many examples of mummies being moved to protect them from robbery or to reorganize burials. Reburial was not necessarily an act of disrespect. It could be an attempt to preserve a royal ancestor even when the original tomb could no longer be maintained. But relocation could strip a body of identity. A mummy removed from its first coffin might receive reused equipment. Names could be erased to make objects politically acceptable. Several individuals might be placed together in a chamber designed for someone else. Later tomb robbers or restorers could disturb the arrangement again. By the time modern excavators entered such a burial, the body, coffin, inscriptions, and architecture might tell different stories. This is one reason the Nefertiti problem cannot be solved by asking only where her tomb was built. Her first burial place and her final resting place may not have been the same. The restoration therefore preserved Egypt while damaging the historical map needed to follow its missing queen. Akhenaten lost its court, its temples lost their walls, and the official chronology lost several rulers. Yet destruction was never complete. Beneath later carvings remained earlier names. Inside pylons waited painted blocks. In abandoned workshops rested unfinished portraits. And perhaps, in a Theban tomb, a royal body from Amarna survived after being carried hundreds of kilometers south, separated from the objects that once named it. As the city faded, the search for Nefertiti moved into a different landscape. The bright courts of the Aten gave way to the enclosed valleys west of the Nile at Thebes, where royal tombs were cut deep into limestone and hidden beneath desert slopes. There, among relocated kings, reused coffins, unnamed women, and chambers crowded with the dead, archaeology would eventually uncover several members of Tutankhamun's family. None would be found wearing a label that settled the matter. The Queen's Trail had entered the underground world of the Valley of the Kings, where even a preserved face could outlive its name. West of Thebes, the desert folds into a maze of pale limestone ridges. From the river, the valleys seem empty, but behind their slopes lie corridors cut for kings, queens, princes, officials, and the workers who created their afterlives. The Valley of the Kings was never entirely secret. Tomb construction required architects, stone cutters, painters, guards, priests, and administrators. Yet its geography offered a form of concealment unavailable to the Great Pyramids. Entrances could be buried beneath debris, hidden behind later buildings, or lost when floods swept stones across the valley floor. For anyone searching for Nefertiti, this landscape offers both hope and a warning. It preserves bodies remarkably well, but it also preserves centuries of movement, robbery, repair, and misidentification. Akhenaten had rejected this royal cemetery when he founded Akhetaten. His boundary declaration specified a burial in the eastern cliffs of the new capital, where the rising sun could illuminate the sacred horizon. Nefertiti and Merenstetten were included within the royal burial plan. The theology was geographical as well as religious. The king's city, temple, palace, and tomb belonged within a single landscape chosen for the Aten. Returning a royal body to Thebes would therefore have reversed one of the revolution's most personal decisions. But after the abandonment of Akhetaten, practicality may have outweighed ideology. An isolated tomb in a politically rejected city could no longer depend upon the institutions required to protect and maintain it. The royal tomb at Amarna was not simply unfinished rock. It had received decoration and burial equipment, and evidence suggests that Akhenaten was probably interred there. Yet the tomb suffered severe destruction. The king's stone sarcophagus was broken, though fragments later allowed it to be reconstructed. Reliefs were damaged, and portable objects disappeared. Whether the destruction occurred during political reaction, robbery, later quarrying, or several separate episodes remains debated. What survives does not reveal the fate of every body once intended for its chambers. Nefertiti may never have been buried there, or she may have rested there only briefly before a transfer. The clearest indication that Mana royalty reached the Valley of the Kings comes from tomb KV35. Discovered in 1907, it contained a bewildering mixture of objects connected with the royal family of Akhenaten. A large gilded shrine had been made for Queen Tiye, Akhenaten's mother. Magical bricks bore Akhenaten's name. Canopic equipment and a damaged coffin showed signs of adaptation. Inside lay a male mummy whose identity became one of Egyptology's longest disputes. The coffin's face and identifying inscriptions had been attacked, as though someone wished to preserve the burial while denying the occupant a name. Later genetic work connected the mummy closely to Tutankhamun and supported his position as Tutankhamun's father, strengthening the case that the body is Akhenaten, though questions about age estimates, methods, and interpretation have not vanished completely. KV55 demonstrates that at least some remains and burial goods associated with Amarna were transported to Thebes. It does not reveal when the transfer occurred or who supervised it. The move may have taken place under Tutankhamun, when restoration was underway, but members of the royal family still had personal reasons to protect their predecessors. It may have occurred later, when the Amarna tomb became insecure. Objects from different individuals may have been gathered into a small chamber as part of a hurried reburial. The arrangement encountered by modern excavators was already a historical puzzle, assembled by ancient hands. Other tombs widened the list of possible royal women. KV21 contained 2 female mummies, now known simply as KV21A and KV21B. Their original names were lost, and the remains suffered substantial damage after discovery. Partial genetic results have encouraged possible connections with Tutankhamun's family, but the data are insufficient for secure historical identification. KV62, the tomb of Tutankhamun, preserved burial equipment reused from earlier royal owners and objects bearing traces of the Amarna succession. KV35, built for Amenhotep II, eventually held several relocated royal mummies inside chambers. Each tomb contains evidence that bodies and objects did not always remain where their first funerals placed them. Movement became even more common centuries later, when royal tombs faced systematic robbery. During the late New Kingdom and early Third Intermediate period, officials opened damaged burials, rewrapped royal mummies, repaired coffins, recorded transfers, and placed multiple rulers together in protected caches. Famous groups were recovered from a cliff tomb at Deir el-Bahri and from KV35. These ancient restorers were trying to save the royal dead, but they also complicated modern identification. A mummy could be placed in another person's coffin, wrapped with a docket naming a transfer, or deposited beside individuals from a different dynasty. When labels survived, they provided invaluable evidence. When they did not, anatomy and kinship became the only remaining guides. No surviving transfer record securely names Nefertiti. That silence may mean her body was never moved to Thebes. It may mean that her label was removed because of her Amarna identity. It may mean she was transferred under a kingly name not immediately recognized as hers. It may simply mean the relevant record has been lost. The valley contains many tombs that were never completed, reused for different occupants, or stripped before archaeology began. What survives in the record suggests repeated reorganization rather than a single orderly royal cemetery. The most dramatic modern proposal placed Nefertiti not in a known cache, but behind the decorated walls of Tutankhamun's burial chamber. Subtle lines visible in high-resolution images led to the suggestion that KV62 might be only the outer portion of a larger tomb originally made for Nefertiti. The idea attracted worldwide attention because it promised an untouched royal burial concealed beside the most famous tomb ever discovered. Radar surveys produced conflicting early interpretations. A later, more extensive investigation found no evidence for hidden chambers immediately adjacent to Tutankhamun's tomb. The negative result does not prove that Nefertiti lies nowhere else in the valley, but it removes the basis for claiming that her burial certainly waits behind those specific walls. This is the recurring pattern of the search. A faint architectural line becomes a possible doorway. An altered coffin becomes a lost queen. A damaged female mummy acquires a famous name because the chronology appears to fit. Each clue deserves investigation, but none can carry more certainty than its evidence allows. Tombs are not sealed time capsules once they have been opened, reused, robbed, flooded, repaired, and excavated through changes standards of documentation. Even an undisturbed chamber would need inscriptions or biological comparisons before its occupant could be identified securely. The Valley of the Kings, nevertheless, remains essential because it preserves the physical family around Nefertiti's mystery. Akhenaten's probable mummy may be present in KV55. Tutankhamun rested in KV62, with objects inherited from the unsettled years before him. Female remains from KV21 may belong to women of the same court, and inside KV35, 3 anonymous bodies lay in a side chamber, an older woman, a younger woman, and a young male. Their identities were not written clearly upon them. For decades they remained figures described by appearance and location, waiting for photography, radiology, anatomy, and eventually DNA to place them within the royal family. Among them was the woman who had become the most persistent candidate for Nefertiti, not because her tomb named her, but because her body carried a relationship that history had forgotten. In March 1898, the French archaeologist Victor Loret entered a tomb whose entrance had been hidden beneath the debris of the Valley of the Kings. The burial was catalogued as KV35 and had been made more than 3,000 years earlier for Amenhotep II, a powerful ruler of the 18th dynasty. Its corridors descended through the limestone into pillared halls and side chambers arranged around the king's burial apartment. The tomb had been robbed, restored, reused, and reorganized long before Lorette arrived. What waited inside was not one untouched royal funeral, but a refuge created from the remains of many. Amenhotep II still lay within his stone sarcophagus, an unusual survival in a valley where royal bodies had often been removed from their original tombs. Elsewhere in KV35, Lorette encountered mummies brought from other burials for protection. Some carried labels or restoration dockets that allowed their names to be recovered. The group included several rulers from later generations, placed together when tomb robbery threatened the royal cemeteries. Ancient officials had transformed Amenhotep II's tomb into a cache, concealing kings who had once possessed elaborate monuments of their own. The arrangement preserved them, but it also detached bodies from architecture, coffins, and funerary goods that had originally explained who they were. In one side chamber lay 3 additional individuals. They were not identified by secure coffin inscriptions or surviving mummy labels. One was an older woman, another a younger woman, and the third a young male whose presence has generated its own unresolved questions. The 2 women became known through descriptive labels, the elder lady and the younger lady. These names sound almost personal after decades of use, but they are no more than archaeological shorthand. Younger distinguishes one woman from the other. It is not a precise age, title, or statement about their relationship. The chamber offered few clues about when the 3 had been placed there. They may have entered KV35 during a royal reburial operation, perhaps alongside the named kings hidden elsewhere in the tomb. Their bodies could have been transferred from separate tombs or from a shared family burial. Any labels may have disappeared before the relocation, during ancient robbery, or through the later deterioration of wrappings and coffins. The room preserved a group, but not the logic behind the group. Proximity suggested that the individuals might be connected, yet people placed together in a cache were not necessarily immediate relatives. The elder lady gradually attracted an identification with Queen Tae, the wife of Amenhotep III and mother of Akhenaten. Her facial appearance was considered consistent with known portraits, but resemblance alone could not prove identity. A more unusual clue survived in Tutankhamun's tomb, a lock of hair sealed within a small coffin bearing T's name. The possibility of comparing that material with the elder lady offered a rare connection between a named royal object and an anonymous body. Later molecular work would support the identification, though the full reliability of such comparisons still depends upon sample preservation and laboratory method. The important point was that an anonymous mummy in KV35 could indeed belong to the Amarna royal family. The younger lady was more difficult. Early anatomical examinations classified her as a woman who had died as a young adult, though age estimates varied. She had no surviving royal name, no original coffin, and no burial equipment securely belonging to her. Her body showed features that invited comparison with Amarna art, but those comparisons were subjective. The distinctive artistic style of Akhenaten's court could make almost any elongated face or delicate profile appear suggestive. Physical resemblance to a sculpture was especially dangerous in Nefertiti's case, because the famous Berlin bust had become the standard by which people imagined her. Over the following century, the younger lady was photographed, examined, radiographed, and repeatedly discussed. Every new technique seemed to promise that the silent body might finally reveal a name. Yet the early history of the mummy complicated later work. Archaeological practice in 1898 differed greatly from modern conservation standards. Remains could be moved, unwrapped, handled, measured, photographed, and exposed to environments that increased the risk of contamination. Records were valuable, but not always detailed enough to reconstruct every movement. These conditions do not make scientific analysis impossible, but they matter whenever claims depend upon tiny amounts of surviving biological material. The possibility that the younger lady was Nefertiti gained public attention long before a complete genetic family study was published. Supporters pointed to her estimated age, royal setting, physical features, pierced ear, shaved scalp, and the association of certain wig styles with Amarna women. One widely publicized identification argued that these clues, taken together, favored Nefertiti. Most specialists considered the case unproven. Ear piercing was not unique to one queen. A wig found nearby was not securely attached to the body. The position of an arm could have been altered during ancient or modern handling. Artistic resemblance remained uncertain, and the mummy's family relationships had not yet been established. This episode revealed how easily a famous name can gather around anonymous remains. Nefertiti possesses a face recognized by millions, while the younger lady possesses a face without a name. Joining them creates an emotionally satisfying solution, but archaeology requires more than visual compatibility. It must ask whether the woman lived at the correct time, belonged to the appropriate family, occupied the necessary generation, and fits what is known about Nefertiti's documented relationships. Even then, a match might remain one possibility among several. KV35 also shows why the word discovered can be misleading. Lauret discovered the chamber in the modern archaeological sense, but ancient officials had already discovered, moved, and reburied its occupants centuries before. They may have known every name. They may have selected the chamber according to family's rank, convenience, or available space. By removing original coffins or placing damaged bodies in a protected tomb, they saved human remains while allowing identities to fade. Modern science inherited the result, preserved individuals whose biological evidence survived more successfully than their written history. For Nefertiti, the younger lady seemed to offer almost everything the search lacked. She was a royal-era woman found among members of the 18th dynasty. She'd been placed in a tomb that contained relocated rulers. Her date and setting made an Amarna connection plausible. Her face could be examined, her bones measured, and her tissues sampled. Yet none of these facts named her. At the moment of discovery, she was simply an unidentified woman in a side chamber of Amenhotep II's tomb. The body would eventually surrender one extraordinary fact. Genetic analysis would place the younger lady directly inside Tutankhamun's immediate family, and identify her as his biological mother. That result narrowed the historical possibilities more sharply than facial comparison ever could. At the same time, it created a deeper problem. If the younger lady was Tutankhamun's mother, could she also be Nefertiti? The answer would depend not only upon DNA, but upon the uncertain ancestry of a queen whose parents were never securely recorded. The younger lady has a face, but not the face she possessed in life. Mummification preserves the body by transforming it. Dehydration reduces and tightens soft tissue. Embalming substances alter surfaces. Wrapping can compress features, while later handling, environmental change, and ancient damage can shift what remains. When modern cameras photograph a mummy, they do not capture an ancient person sleeping unchanged. They record the end of a long physical process. This matters because Nefertiti's identity has often been approached through faces the serene painted bust from a sculptor's workshop and the damaged features of an unnamed woman from KV35. Physical anthropology begins with evidence less emotionally immediate than resemblance. Examiners study the pelvis, skull, teeth, long bones, joint surfaces, and the degree to which different parts of the skeleton have matured or changed with age. From these, they estimate biological sex, age at death, stature, health, and sometimes patterns of physical stress. The word estimate is essential. An adult body does not contain a precise calendar. Dental wear varies with diet. Joint change differs between individuals, and skeletal markers often produce ranges rather than exact ages. The younger lady is generally regarded as a young adult woman, often placed somewhere around her mid-20s to mid-30s, but the boundaries are not absolute. Nefertiti's own age is unknown. No inscription records her birth year, and no secure sequence states how old she was when she married Akhenaten or gave birth to her daughters. She remained great royal wife in Akhenaten's year 16, so she had lived through most or all of his reign as an adult member of the royal household. An age estimate for the younger lady can be compared with that broad historical window, but it cannot confirm or exclude Nefertiti with the precision sometimes claimed. A woman in her 30s could fit several possible members of the Amarna family. Even a narrower estimate would remain only one part of an identification. Computed tomography changed the study of mummies by allowing researchers to examine structures beneath preserved tissue without extensive physical intervention. A CT scanner produces a series of cross-sectional images that can be combined into a three-dimensional model. Teeth, sinuses, fractures, bone density, embalming materials, and objects within wrappings can be studied in detail. For the younger lady, scans supported her classification as female and provided a clearer view of her skull and physical condition. They also revealed how much of her appearance had been affected by damage rather than normal anatomy. The most striking defect lies along the left side of her face, involving the cheek and jaw region. Some investigators have argued that the injury occurred close to the time of death and may have been severe enough to be fatal. The presence and arrangement of embalming material have been used to support the idea that the damage existed before or during mummification, rather than resulting from recent handling. Other damage to royal mummies is known to have occurred during ancient robbery, rewrapping, transport, or early examination, and interpretations of the younger lady's condition have not been entirely uniform. The evidence remains incomplete, and a dramatic wound should not be turned into a murder narrative without stronger context. Even if the injury occurred during life, it does not reveal who caused it or under what circumstances. Her ears have also received unusual attention. Piercing patterns were once presented as a clue linking the body with royal women shown wearing particular ornaments, but ear piercing was not unique to Nefertiti, and a hole in an earlobe cannot function as a personal signature. The same caution applies to the shaved or closely treated scalp, arm position, and possible association with a wig found in the chamber. Ancient embalmers prepared bodies according to changing customs. While reburial and later disturbance could alter posture and separate objects from their original owners, a feature may be consistent with Nefertiti without being distinctive enough to identify her. Facial reconstruction seems to offer a more direct encounter. Using CT data or a cast of the skull, specialists place tissue depth markers at selected anatomical points, rebuild major muscles, and estimate the shape of the nose, lips, cheeks, and other features. The skull constrains the result, but it does not determine every visible detail. The tip of the nose, fullness of the lips, outer ears, body fat, wrinkles, hairstyle, skin tone, and expression require varying degrees of inference. Reference datasets for tissue depth are based on modern populations and may not perfectly represent an individual who lived in Egypt more than 3,000 years ago. Two reconstructions made from the same skull can therefore look like different people, while both remain anatomically plausible. Lighting and artistic finish add another layer: a calm expression, carefully chosen hair, royal jewellery, and a familiar crown can make an anonymous woman seem unmistakably like Nefertiti before the scientific argument has even begun. Once a reconstruction is presented under her name, the image can circulate faster than the qualifications attached to it. Visual certainty arrives long before historical certainty. Comparing such a reconstruction with the Berlin bust compounds the problem. The bust is extraordinarily lifelike, but it is still a work of royal art. Its symmetry, proportions, painted surfaces, and idealized finish reflect workshop decisions and the aesthetic language of Amarna. It may preserve individual traits, yet it was not created as a forensic record. The missing inlay in one eye, the deliberate modelling of the face, and its possible use as a sculptural reference all remind us that it belonged to an artistic process. A modern reconstruction that resembles the bust may partly reflect choices made by artists at both ends of the comparison. Physical appearance also cannot settle arguments about Nefertiti's ancestry. Ancient Egypt stood at the meeting point of northeastern Africa, the Nile Valley, the Mediterranean, and the Near East. People moved through diplomacy, trade, marriage, military service, and migration. Features interpreted by modern viewers as belonging to one present-day population are unreliable indicators of an individual's ancient identity. Skin color added to a reconstruction is an informed artistic estimate, not a genetic result unless specific pigmentation variants have been recovered and interpreted with sufficient confidence. Even then, appearance would not reveal whether the woman was called Nefertiti. Anatomy is most powerful when it eliminates impossibilities or establishes broad compatibility. A male body could not be Nefertiti. A woman from the wrong period would be an implausible candidate. An age far outside the historical range would create serious difficulty. Evidence of close family resemblance might support a hypothesis, but it would remain weaker than molecular kinship. In the younger lady's case, physical study shows an adult woman of the appropriate broad era whose remains were preserved among royals. It does not provide a unique trait connecting her to the queen. The face remains compelling because human beings are exceptionally sensitive to faces and exceptionally willing to find meaning within them. The younger lady appears individual, vulnerable, and close enough to recognition that a name seems almost recoverable by sight. Yet her damaged features cannot speak the missing inscription. The decisive change came when scientists stopped asking whether she looked like Nefertiti and began asking whose biological daughter, sister, and mother she had been. DNA could not restore her face, but it could place her within a family, and that family led directly to Tutankhamun. When the royal family study appeared in 2010, it seemed to offer what a century of excavation had not: a biological map through the final generations of the 18th dynasty. Researchers examined Tutankhamun and a group of mummies believed, through inscriptions, archaeology, or physical evidence, to belong to his extended family. Computed tomography documented their anatomy, while genetic tests compared selected regions of nuclear DNA. The goal was not initially to find Nefertiti. It was to reconstruct Tutankhamun's ancestry and investigate his health. Yet the resulting pedigree placed the KV35 younger lady at the centre of the missing queen debate. The analysis used short tandem repeats, often called STRs. These are regions of DNA in which small sequences repeat a variable number of times. Because individuals inherit one version from each parent, patterns across multiple STR markers can be used to evaluate close biological relationships. Similar methods have long been used in forensic identification and paternity testing. With ancient material, however, the process is far more difficult. DNA breaks into short fragments after death, and the quantity of surviving human material can be extremely low. Researchers must distinguish authentic ancient sequences from contamination introduced by microbes, excavators, conservators, laboratory workers, and anyone else who has handled the remains. The 2010 team sampled multiple mummies and reported genetic profiles that could be arranged into a family spanning several generations. Amenhotep III and the elder lady from KV35 formed one parental pair within the proposed pedigree. This supported the elder lady's identification as Queen Tai, already suggested by historical context and comparison with the lock of hair from Tutankhamun's tomb. Their children, according to the reconstruction, included the male from KV55 and the KV35 younger lady. Those two individuals were identified as full siblings. The study then placed the KV55 male and the younger lady as the biological parents of Tutankhamun. The result was striking. The anonymous woman from the side chamber was not merely a possible Amarna court member. She belonged to the closest possible circle around the king. If the pedigree is correct, she was a daughter of Amenhotep III and Tiye, a sister of the KV55 male, and the mother of Tutankhamun. The KV55 male's genetic position, combined with archaeological evidence and his probable connection to Akhenaten, strengthened the identification of that body as Akhenaten, although the damaged coffin and historical uncertainties still require caution. This family structure also indicated that Tutankhamun's parents were close biological relatives, most likely brother and sister. Royal marriage among close kin was not unknown in Egypt, where dynastic legitimacy and divine models could encourage unions within the ruling family. But the finding applies to the two mummies as reconstructed in the genetic pedigree. It does not demonstrate anything about Nefertiti's parents, ancestry, or marriage unless the younger lady is first proven to be Nefertiti. That final step was never made by the study. The published article consistently referred to the woman as the younger lady or KV35YL. It did not identify her as Nefertiti. This distinction is easy to lose when results travel from scientific tables into headlines and documentaries. A statement that DNA found Tutankhamun's mother can quickly become a statement that DNA found Nefertiti, especially when popular genealogy already assumes she was his mother. But those are separate claims. The first concerns biological relationship. The second requires historical identification. DNA supplied a position within the family. It did not supply the woman's name. The pedigree was influential, but it did not end methodological debate. Specialists in ancient DNA questioned whether the published evidence met the strongest standards for authenticating highly degraded material. Egypt's heat accelerates molecular decay, and mummification introduces chemicals, resins, oils, salts, and other substances that may inhibit laboratory reactions. Royal mummies were also handled repeatedly over more than a century. Modern human contamination can be especially difficult to detect when researchers use PCR, a technique that amplifies tiny fragments of DNA. PCR is powerful precisely because it can multiply a scarce signal, but it can multiply contamination as readily as authentic ancient material. Critics also noted the reliance upon microsatellite or STR data rather than complete genomic sequences STR profiles can be effective for close kinship analysis when the underlying alleles are reliable. But damaged ancient DNA may produce allele dropout, false peaks, and inconsistent replication. If one inherited variant fails to amplify, a relationship can appear different from what it was. Strong ancient DNA practice therefore seeks independent replication, negative controls, characteristic damage patterns, molecular sex confirmation, mitochondrial and nuclear comparisons, and ideally results from separate laboratories. The 2010 study described precautions and repeated testing, but not every specialist accepted that the published data allowed the same level of confidence claimed by the authors. These criticisms do not automatically make the pedigree wrong. They mean that confidence must be proportional to the evidence, and that improved methods should test the result again. Ancient DNA research has advanced rapidly since the study was conducted. Modern sequencing can recover millions of short fragments, identify biochemical patterns produced by age, estimate contamination, and compare evidence across the genome rather than at a limited set of markers. Such methods have succeeded with some Egyptian remains, although preservation varies greatly from one mummy or skeletal element to another. A sample that fails in one body does not prove that all Egyptian DNA is lost, just as one successful genome does not guarantee success for every royal mummy. The family reconstruction also depends upon the archaeological identities assigned to some individuals. A genetic network can reveal that one body is the parent, sibling, or descendant of another. Attaching names requires separate evidence. Amenhotep III's identity is supported by burial history and inscriptions. Tie's identification combines genetic, physical, and archaeological clues. KV55 is widely considered Akhenaten, but the debate over the mummy's estimated age once led some scholars to propose Smenkhkare. If one named identification changes, the biological relationships can remain valid while the historical labels attached to them shift. This is the strange strength of DNA in archaeology. It can be more certain about relationship than biography. It may show that two anonymous bodies are siblings, even when no surviving document mentions them together. It can demonstrate maternity without preserving a personal name. In the Tutankhamun pedigree, the younger lady becomes biologically vivid. She is no longer an isolated body in KV35, but a daughter, sister, and mother within a royal network. Yet her own identity remains blank. Later specialist reviews continued to describe Tutankhamun's mother as historically unidentified. Calls for retesting emphasize the value of recovering mitochondrial DNA, broader nuclear data, and molecular sex information through newer sequencing approaches. A successful reanalysis could confirm the 2010 relationships, refine them, or expose errors caused by damaged markers. It might also connect KV35 with other anonymous women from the period. But even perfect genetic confirmation would still leave the central historical problem intact, unless Nefertiti's own family could be defined independently. The DNA result therefore changes the question without answering it. Before 2010, the younger lady could be imagined as almost any royal woman of the right era. After the study, she occupies a specific place, the proposed daughter of Amenhotep III and Ta, the full sister of the KV55 male, and the mother of Tutankhamun. If Nefertiti belonged in exactly that place, the case for identifying her would become powerful. If she came from the family of A and Te, from another Egyptian elite lineage, or from abroad, the younger lady would almost certainly be someone else. Science had drawn the branch. History still had to decide whether Nefertiti's name belonged upon it. If the 2010 pedigree is accepted, Identifying the younger lady as Nefertiti requires a very specific historical claim. Nefertiti would have to be a biological daughter of Amenhotep III and Queen Tiye, a full sister of the KV35 male, probably Akhenaten, and the biological mother of Tutankhamun. None of these relationships is impossible within an 18th dynasty royal family. The difficulty is that none is securely stated for Nefertiti in surviving inscriptions. The genetic profile and the documented queen do not meet naturally. They can be joined, but only by inserting assumptions into the missing parts of her biography. A daughter of Amenhotep III would ordinarily have strong reason to advertise that status. Royal birth was a source of legitimacy, especially for a woman who became great royal wife and perhaps later pharaoh. Yet Nefertiti is not securely called king's daughter in the known record, nor is she clearly identified as king's sister in relation to Akhenaten. Her titles celebrate beauty, favour, lordship over the two lands, and her position beside the king, but they do not provide the family labels expected if she were the daughter of Amenhotep III and Tiye. Absence is not proof, particularly in a damaged record, but this silence weighs against the identification. Amenhotep III and Tiye had several known daughters, including Sitamun, Izet, Henuteneb, and Nebita. While the position of Bakataten within the family remains debated, these women do not all possess equally complete biographies. A royal daughter could disappear from the record, change status, or be known through only a few monuments. The younger lady may therefore be one of Amenhotep III and Tiye's documented or undocumented daughters. Nebita and Bakataten have both entered discussions of her identity. Genetics, as presently reported, cannot choose between sisters who share the same parents. To make the younger lady into Nefertiti, one possibility is that a royal daughter adopted a new name and ceased using titles that revealed her birth. Ancient Egyptians did change names, especially when religious or political circumstances shifted. Nefertiti herself expanded her name to Neferneferuaten, Nefertiti during Akhenaten's reign, but a possible mechanism is not evidence that the change occurred. No inscription links Nefertiti's name with Nebeta, Bakataten, or any other daughter of Amenhotep III. Without such a bridge, the proposal remains a reconstruction designed to make the DNA and the famous queen fit one another. The maternity of Tutankhamun creates a second test. Nefertiti is securely shown with 6 daughters, whose names and order can be followed through royal scenes. No surviving image or inscription securely identifies Tutankhamun as her son. This does not prove that she was not his mother. Royal sons were not always represented according to the same patterns as daughters, and political changes may have affected how his identity was recorded. Tutankhamun's original parentage was already obscured by the time later history remembered him. Still, calling him Nefertiti's son goes beyond the surviving written evidence. If Nefertiti were the younger lady, she and Akhenaten would have been full siblings as well as royal partners. Close-kin marriages occurred in Egyptian royalty, so the relationship would not by itself be disqualifying, but the identification would reshape the queen's entire origin story. She would no longer be best explained as a woman from the family of A and Tay or as an elite non-royal Egyptian. The title held by Tay as nurse of Nefertiti would require interpretation within a royal upbringing, perhaps as evidence that a princess was raised by a court nurse. Again, this is possible. It simply lacks direct confirmation. The foreign princess theory fits even less comfortably with the reported pedigree. If the younger lady was the biological daughter of Amenhotep III and Tiye, she cannot simultaneously be Tadukipa, the Mitannian princess sent to Egypt from another royal house. This contradiction is sometimes blurred by treating every uncertain theory as if it could be true at once. It cannot. Either the younger lady's reported parents are correct, or she was born to different parents. Either Nefertiti was Tutankhamun, or she was not. The available evidence supports the existence of Tutankhamun, but provides no secure link between her and Nefertiti. Population-level DNA does not resolve the conflict. Genetic data from mummies at Abu Sir el-Melek cover different individuals, places, and periods. The complete genome recovered from an Old Kingdom man at Nuweirat represents a major technical achievement. But he lived more than 1,000 years before Nefertiti and is only one person. His ancestry cannot be used to declare Nefertiti Egyptian, Mitannian, Levantine, or anything else. Populations are not static, and royal families were connected through diplomacy across generations. The origin of a named individual requires evidence tied to that individual or to securely identified close relatives. Nefertiti's 6 daughters offer possible biological pathways, but most lead back into uncertainty. Meritaten's final fate is unclear. Ankhesenamun became the wife of Tutankhamun, but her mummy has not been securely identified. The younger daughters vanish from the surviving record. If one of their bodies were confidently named and yielded mitochondrial DNA, it could provide a maternal line reference for Nefertiti. Daughters inherit mitochondrial DNA from their mother and pass it to their own descendants. A match with an anonymous woman could be powerful, but only if the daughter's identity were established independently. Otherwise, the comparison would connect 2 unknown bodies without naming either one. This is why the younger lady remains a strong candidate for someone important, but a weakly proven candidate for Nefertiti specifically. Her royal setting fits. Her date fits broadly. Her reported relationship to Akhenaten and Tutankhamun places her exactly where a major Amarna woman might be expected. Yet the pedigree also defines her in a way that conflicts with the Queen's known titles and commonly reconstructed origins. The evidence can be reconciled, but reconciliation requires Nefertiti to be an otherwise unrecorded daughter of Amenhotep III, and Tiye, who married her full brother, bore Tutankhamun without being securely recorded as his mother, and became famous under a new identity that concealed her royal parentage. Such a life is not impossible in the broken history of Amarna. It is simply not the conclusion produced directly by DNA. The genetic study identifies relationships among samples. Egyptology supplies possible names. Where the 2 overlap, confidence increases. Where they do not, a famous identity should not be forced onto the biology. No single explanation fully accounts for Nefertiti's titles. The younger lady's proposed pedigree, the uncertain succession, and the missing burials. The most responsible conclusion is therefore narrower than the most dramatic one. The younger lady is proposed as Tutankhamun's mother and a full sister of his father. She was probably a royal daughter of Amenhotep III and Tiye if the pedigree is correct. Nefertiti is not securely documented as occupying that position. She could still be the younger lady, but the case remains unproven and faces serious historical difficulties. Elsewhere in the Valley of the Kings, other women wait behind equally incomplete labels. KV21, A may belong to a queen connected with Tutankhamun. KV21, B may preserve another member of the same generation. Unidentified fragments, altered coffins, and disturbed burials leave open the possibility that Nefertiti's body has been found under a different number, or has not been found at all. The younger lady narrows one branch of the family, but the missing queen may stand on another branch whose remains have yet to acquire a name. The younger lady is not the only anonymous woman caught within the Amarna family tree. The Valley of the Kings contains bodies without names, names without bodies, and burial objects whose inscriptions have been altered so often that ownership becomes a sequence rather than a fact. For Nefertiti, this means the search cannot rest upon a single candidate. If the younger lady's reported ancestry does not fit the queen comfortably, another mummy may preserve a better biological match, or Nefertiti may remain outside the known collection entirely. Tomb KV21 illustrates how quickly evidence can deteriorate. Giovanni Belzoni entered it in 1817 and found 2 female mummies in a chamber cut deep within the valley. When the tomb was located and examined again in modern times, the remains had suffered extensive damage. The women are now designated KV21A and KV21B, labels that preserve only their tomb number and the need to tell them apart. Their arm positions and mummification have been interpreted as signs of high royal status, but the tomb's original ownership is unknown, and neither woman retains a secure inscription naming her. The 2010 family study obtained only partial genetic profiles from KV21A and KV21B. For KV21A, the available markers suggested a possible relationship to members of Tutankhamun's household. This led to the proposal that she might be Ankhesenamun, Nefertiti's daughter and Tutankhamun's great royal wife. The published data did not reach the level required for a statistically secure identification. KV21A therefore remains a candidate for Ankhesenamun, not a mummy proven to be her. KV21B yielded even less useful information, leaving her historical identity still more open. A secure identification of Ankhesenamun would matter enormously for the search for Nefertiti. Mitochondrial DNA passes through the maternal line. Nefertiti and her daughters should share the same basic mitochondrial lineage, apart from rare mutations. If KV21A were independently established as Ankhesenamun, her mitochondrial genome could become a reference for testing anonymous women. A strong match would not automatically prove that another body was Nefertiti, since maternal relatives can share the same lineage, but it would narrow the candidates. At present, the argument cannot escape its circular structure. KV21A is considered Ankhesenamun partly because of the family connection scientists hope to use in identifying Nefertiti. Meritaten presents another missing body. As Nefertiti's eldest daughter, she rose to exceptional prominence and became great royal wife beside Smenkhkare. Some scholars have proposed her as the female ruler Neferneferuaten, though Nefertiti remains a leading candidate. No mummy is securely identified as Meritaten. If her remains were found and named through inscriptions, they could also provide a maternal line link to Nefertiti. Yet if the 2010 pedigree is correct, the younger lady cannot be Meritaten, because the younger lady belongs to Akhenaten's generation as his full sister, rather than to the generation of his daughter. Other daughters fade from the record with similarly uncertain endings. Their names appear in changing combinations on Amarna monuments, and some may have received burial preparations within the royal tomb. Damage to the tomb and later removal of remains prevent a clear reconstruction. Fragmentary funerary objects can suggest that a burial was planned, but they do not prove where the body ultimately rested. A royal woman could have been interred at Amarna, transferred to Thebes, placed in an unmarked chamber, or lost through ancient destruction. The evidence permits several paths and confirms none. Kia, another wife of Akhenaten, is often introduced as a possible mother of Tutankhamun. She held distinctive titles and appears on monuments from the Amarna period, before her images and inscriptions were altered or replaced. Her origins and fate are uncertain, and no body has been securely identified as hers. If the younger lady is truly a daughter of Amenhotep III and Tiye, identifying her as Kia would require Kia to be an otherwise unrecognized royal daughter. Her known titles do not establish that relationship. Like Nefertiti, she can be made to fit the genetic pedigree only by adding an undocumented ancestry. Royal daughters such as Nebeta or possibly Bakataten fit the reported genetic position more naturally because they may have been daughters of Amenhotep III and Tiye, yet neither is securely documented as Tutankhamun's mother. Their biographies are too sparse to provide a clear path into the Amarna succession. The younger lady may be a woman whose political importance was far greater than her surviving monuments suggest, or one whose name was deliberately separated from her burial. She need not be the most famous missing woman merely because modern audiences recognize fewer alternatives. The royal tomb at Amarna could still contain overlooked evidence within damaged side chambers, but expectations must remain measured. Much of the complex has been accessible since antiquity, and its contents were heavily disturbed. New excavation can recover tiny fragments of inscriptions, pottery, burial equipment, or human remains from debris. Such discoveries may refine the number of individuals once buried there. Recovering a complete, untouched royal mummy is less likely. Even a fragment yielding DNA would need secure archaeological context before it could be assigned to Nefertiti or one of her daughters. Undiscovered tombs may remain in both the Amarna cliffs and the Theban valleys. Ground surveys, excavation, and remote sensing continue to reveal architectural features and previously unknown spaces. But an empty chamber, a sealed doorway, or a radar anomaly is not automatically a royal burial. The search for a famous queen creates a powerful temptation to interpret every void as her tomb. The failed claim of a chamber directly behind Tutankhamun's burial wall shows why multiple independent methods are required before a possibility becomes discovery. There is also a more difficult possibility Nefertiti's body may no longer survive in a recoverable form. Tomb robbery, political destruction, water, salts, insects, mishandling, and ancient reburial could separate or destroy remains. Mummification was designed for eternity, but it did not guarantee it. Royal status increased the quality of burial while also making tombs attractive targets. The absence of an identified mummy does not prove that archaeologists have overlooked an intact queen waiting nearby. Every candidate therefore carries a different kind of incompleteness. The younger lady has relatively strong proposed kinship data but no historical name. KV21. A has a possible connection to Tutankhamun's household, but only partial DNA. KV21b has even less. Meritaten, Ankhesenamun, Kia, Nebeta, and Bakataten possess names and fragments of biography, but no securely identified bodies. Nefertiti has abundant images and titles, yet neither parents nor remains that can be used as an unquestioned genetic reference. The puzzle resembles a set of labels separated from their objects. Archaeology can try to restore the pairs, but every proposed match must survive several tests at once: date, sex, age, burial context, genealogy, titulary, molecular relationship, and historical plausibility. A failure in one category may weaken the entire identification. A success in several categories may still leave more than one candidate. This is why finding additional DNA is not enough by itself. The crucial question is whether that DNA can be anchored to a name through evidence independent of the genetic result. Without an anchor, sequencing more anonymous mummies may produce an increasingly detailed family portrait whose individuals remain numbered rather than named. Science can reveal who stood close to whom in biological terms. To decide which of those women once wore Nefertiti's crown, it must recover the point where molecules and written history meet. Ancient DNA does not survive as an intact blueprint waiting to be read. From the moment cells cease repairing themselves, long chromosomes begin breaking into smaller pieces. Heat, moisture, oxygen, microbes, burial chemistry, and time accelerate the damage. In Egypt, high temperatures are especially destructive, even when desert conditions preserve skin, hair, and the overall shape of a body. A mummy can appear remarkably complete while containing very little recoverable human DNA. Visual preservation and molecular preservation are not the same thing. Mummification adds another layer. Natron dehydration may help slow some forms of decay, but oils, resins, waxes, plant products, and other embalming substances can interfere with DNA extraction and amplification. The body may also contain far more microbial DNA than human DNA. A laboratory sample taken from bone or tissue therefore produces a mixture fragments from the ancient person, organisms involved in decomposition, environmental material, and possibly modern people who handled the mummy. The central task is not merely recovering DNA, it is proving which molecules are genuinely ancient and genuinely belong to the individual being studied. Modern ancient DNA laboratories use controlled clean rooms separated from facilities where amplified DNA is handled. Researchers wear protective clothing, sterilize surfaces, remove the outer layer of a sample, and process blank controls alongside the archaeological material. Laboratory staff may provide their own genetic profiles so that contamination can be recognized. Independent replication in another laboratory offers further protection against an unnoticed error. None of these procedures can reverse contamination that occurred during excavation or a century of museum handling, but they can help measure and manage it. Authentic ancient DNA carries patterns of damage. Its fragments tend to be short, and certain chemical changes accumulate near their ends, especially the conversion of cytosine that produces characteristic sequencing errors. Modern sequencing can detect these patterns and estimate whether a collection of molecules is ancient. Researchers can also calculate the proportion of DNA that appears to come from outside the individual, compare mitochondrial sequences, and evaluate whether male samples contain unexpected female contamination or the reverse. These methods provide forms of authentication that early PCR-based studies could not apply as comprehensively. The choice of tissue matters. Dense regions of bone, especially the petrous portion near the inner ear, can preserve high concentrations of endogenous DNA. Teeth may protect material within roots and internal tissues. Sampling either one is destructive. However, and royal mummies are culturally important human remains. Removing part of a tooth or drilling dense skull bone cannot be justified casually, particularly when earlier samples may already exist or when less invasive methods could improve. Scientific value must be balanced against conservation, respect, and the possibility that a better technique will emerge later. Mitochondrial DNA is often easier to recover because each cell contains many copies. It can trace maternal relationships, but many maternal relatives share the same lineage. A match might show that two women belong to the same maternal family without distinguishing mother from daughter, aunt from niece, or sisters from one another. The Y chromosome can trace paternal lines in male samples, while nuclear DNA provides information from both parents and is far more powerful for reconstructing close relationships. Nuclear DNA is also usually scarcer and more difficult to obtain from ancient remains. Whole genome sequencing changes the scale of comparison. Instead of examining a small set of STR markers, it samples fragments across the genome. Even low-coverage data can help assess biological sex, ancestry, relatedness, contamination, and authenticity. The recovery of a roughly twofold coverage genome from an Old Kingdom man buried at Nuweirat demonstrated that substantial nuclear DNA can survive in Egypt under favourable circumstances. It was a major technical achievement, but it does not guarantee that the same result can be obtained from every mummy. Preservation varies from body to body, bone to bone, and even between different areas of the same skeleton. The Nuweirat genome also illustrates the difference between population history and personal identification. Researchers could model broad ancestry components and compare the man with ancient and modern populations. They could not use his genome to define the ancestry of all Egyptians across 3,000 years. He lived more than a millennium before Nefertiti. Likewise, genomes from Abusir el-Melek come from a particular site and long chronological range, not from the Amarna royal household. Such studies reveal movement and population connection, but they cannot identify Nefertiti's origin without a sample tied directly to her or her close family. Kinship analysis itself becomes complicated when generations of relatives marry within a narrow dynasty. Close kin unions cause individuals to share more DNA through multiple paths. A person may be related to another as both cousin and in-law, or descend from the same ancestor along several branches. This pedigree collapse can make simple family models misleading. Researchers need enough genomic data to distinguish a parent-child relationship from full siblings and to separate those from other combinations of close kin. Limited STR markers may not always resolve these alternatives, particularly when damaged alleles fail to appear. The historical genealogy is equally important. Suppose modern sequencing confirms that the younger lady is a full sister of the KV35 male and the mother of Tutankhamun. Those relationships would be biologically powerful. If KV55 is Akhenaten, the woman becomes Akhenaten's sister, but DNA still cannot decide whether that sister was Nebeta, Bakataten, Nefertiti under another name, or a royal daughter absent from surviving inscriptions. The same genome can support several historical identities if several women occupy the same possible position. A name enters the analysis only through an external anchor. That anchor could be an undisturbed coffin inscribed for the occupant, a sealed burial with objects that clearly belong to one person, a mummy label considered reliable, or genetic comparison with a relative whose own identity is secure. The strongest identifications combine several independent lines of evidence. If the inscription, burial context, age, sex, genealogy, and DNA all point to the same person, alternative explanations begin to disappear. If one line depends upon another in a circle, confidence is weaker than it first appears. Nefertiti lacks the ideal anchor. Her parents are uncertain. Her daughter's mummies are unidentified. Her original tomb is unknown. No securely labelled biological sample from her is available for comparison. Even the likely female Pharaoh Neferneferuaten cannot be connected to her through an unambiguous statement. Sequencing every plausible mummy might reconstruct the royal family with extraordinary resolution, while leaving Nefertiti's place disputed because the ancient names remain detached from the genetic branches. Disputed datasets must therefore remain open to retesting. The 2010 Tutankhamun pedigree should not be dismissed merely because it used older methods, but neither should it be protected from verification. New extraction procedures, next-generation sequencing, independent laboratories, and transparent publication of raw data could confirm its central relationships. They could also reveal contamination, allele dropout, or alternative pedigrees. Scientific knowledge strengthens when a result survives better methods, not when a famous conclusion becomes too popular to question. DNA can give a mummy back its relatives. Under favourable conditions, those relatives can help give it back a name. What DNA cannot do is leap across a missing historical record by itself. A molecule contains inheritance, not royal titles. It remembers biological descent, but not whether a woman was called Nefertiti, crowned as Neferneferuaten, or buried under a name later erased. The laboratory can narrow the darkness with remarkable precision. The last step still belongs to archaeology, epigraphy, and context, and that is why new technology may transform the search without guaranteeing that the Queen will finally be identified. A convincing new investigation would begin not with a dramatic announcement, but with an audit. Every mummy, fragment, tooth, bone sample, tissue container, photograph, excavation note, and previous laboratory result would need to be matched carefully. Ancient remains can acquire conflicting catalogue numbers as they move between tombs, storerooms, museums, scanning facilities, and laboratories. If the chain of custody is uncertain, even excellent sequencing may analyze the wrong fragment with great precision. The first technology required is therefore documentation. The central candidates would include the KV35 younger lady, the KV55 male, the elder lady, KV21A, and KV21B, together with securely identified royal mummies that can anchor the pedigree. Researchers would need to ask which samples already exist and whether new destructive sampling is justified. A modern project should minimize damage, target the tissues most likely to preserve endogenous material, and record every removal in 3 dimensions. Multiple samples from different parts of the same individual could help distinguish authentic genetic results from localized contamination. Next-generation sequencing would replace reliance upon a limited STR profile. Shotgun sequencing could recover all readable fragments from a sample, while targeted capture methods could enrich mitochondrial DNA or selected regions of the nuclear genome. The best outcome would be genome-wide data from every relevant mummy, sufficient to measure relatedness across thousands or millions of positions. Complete mitochondrial genomes could trace maternal lines. Y chromosome sequences from male mummies could test paternal relationships. Nuclear data could distinguish parents, siblings, half-siblings, and more distant relatives with much greater resolution than a small marker panel. Independent laboratories would be essential. Samples from the same mummy could be processed by separate teams using strict ancient DNA facilities. Results should show the short fragment lengths and molecular damage expected from ancient material. Blank controls should remain free of relevant DNA. Contamination estimates should be published, and raw sequence data should be available for qualified reanalysis. Agreement between laboratories would greatly strengthen the pedigree. Disagreement would reveal where interpretation remains unstable before historical names are attached. A successful retest could answer several important questions. Is the younger lady unquestionably female at the molecular level? Is she truly a full sibling of the KV55 male? Are both biological children of Amenhotep III and the elder lady? Is she certainly Tutankhamun's mother? Does KV21 share a close relationship with Tutankhamun or with the younger lady? Do KV21, A and one of Nefertiti's expected maternal relatives carry the same mitochondrial lineage? Each answer would remove branches from the historical tree. None would automatically write Nefertiti's name onto a mummy, but together they could make some identifications much more plausible and others impossible. If DNA fails, proteins may survive. Proteomics examines ancient proteins preserved in bone, tooth enamel, hair, or other tissues. Certain proteins can help determine biological sex, and broader protein patterns may support species identification or aspects of health. Proteins are generally more durable than DNA, though they carry less detailed genealogical information. They are unlikely to distinguish Nefertiti from a biological sister on their own, but they could confirm that a fragment belongs to a female individual or help determine whether remains from separate locations came from the same body. Stable isotope analysis could address a different part of the mystery where a person spent early life. Ratios of strontium and oxygen preserved in tooth enamel reflect local geology, food, and water during childhood. If Nefertiti's body were a candidate, isotopes might show whether she grew up in Egypt or in a geologically different region. Such results would require careful baseline data and would not translate neatly into modern national borders. Similar isotope signatures can occur in widely separated places, while movement during childhood can complicate the pattern. A non-local result could support foreign upbringing without proving Mitannian identity. A local result could weaken that theory without naming her parents. Radiocarbon dating may help place anonymous remains within the correct period, but royal mummies present complications. Samples can be contaminated by conservation materials or embalming substances. Marine or freshwater foods may shift apparent dates, and the chronological resolution may be too broad to distinguish individuals separated by only a generation. A date consistent with the late 18th dynasty would support candidacy. It could not distinguish Nefertiti from Kia, Meritaten, Nebeta, or another woman who lived within the same decades. Imaging will continue to improve without removing material. High-resolution CT can refine age estimates, reveal internal embalming techniques, identify hidden jewelry or amulets, and compare anatomical traits across family members. Three-dimensional models can allow specialists in different countries to examine the same structures without repeatedly moving fragile remains. Machine-assisted comparison may detect patterns invisible to the eye, but algorithms depend upon the quality and diversity of their training data. A computer can measure similarity more consistently than a human observer. It cannot turn resemblance into identity without an appropriate reference. Technology may also recover names from objects rather than bodies. Multispectral photography can reveal ink no longer visible under normal light. Reflectance imaging and detailed surface scanning can detect traces of erased hieroglyphs beneath recarved inscriptions. Digital reconstruction can reunite talatat scattered across collections and test whether fragments belong to the same scene. A faint epithet on a reused coffin or a hidden feminine ending in a royal name could alter the succession more decisively than another facial reconstruction. The historical anchor needed for DNA may be waiting in an inscription too damaged to read by ordinary light. Archaeology at Amarna remains equally important. Recent work continues to map houses, cemeteries, administrative buildings, and the lives of the city's inhabitants. These excavations have not produced Nefertiti's mummy, but they refine the context in which royal decisions were made. Future work in the royal tomb and surrounding valleys may recover fragments of burial equipment or human remains with secure locations. A discovery does not need to be an untouched golden chamber to matter. A small inscribed object recovered from a sealed layer could connect a royal name to a burial plan more securely than a spectacular but contextless body. Remote sensing can help locate unknown structures, but its limits have already been demonstrated. Radar, electrical methods, thermal imaging, and other surveys detect differences in materials. They do not directly see a queen, a coffin, or a chamber's name. An anomaly must be tested against geology, architecture, and repeat measurements. The third major radar investigation of Tutankhamun's tomb found no evidence for the proposed chambers immediately beyond its decorated walls. That result was scientifically useful even though it closed a popular possibility. Negative evidence prevents the search from becoming an endless collection of invisible rooms. Ethics will shape what happens next. Royal mummies are not merely scientific samples. They are human remains and part of Egypt's cultural heritage. Decisions about testing belong within Egyptian institutions and should involve conservators, archaeologists, geneticists, historians, and specialists in ancient human remains. The most informative tissue may also be the most destructive to obtain. A project that consumes irreplaceable material without producing verifiable data would deepen the mystery rather than solve it. The likely future is gradual. One retest may confirm a maternal line. Another may rule out a candidate. A newly read inscription may separate Neferneferuaten from Nefertiti more clearly, or unite them more firmly. A tomb may yield a woman of the correct age but no name. No single explanation fully accounts for all the missing evidence, and no technology can recreate records that were destroyed beyond recovery. Yet the search is not hopeless. Science has already transformed anonymous royal bodies into a biological family. Better sequencing can test that family again. Proteins, isotopes, imaging, and epigraphy can add independent evidence. The decisive result, if it comes, will probably not be a machine declaring that Nefertiti has been found. It will be a convergence, a body in the right context, a genome in the right family, an age in the right range, and a name that survives on something truly connected to her. Until those lines meet, the missing queen remains close enough to investigate and too distant to claim. The search has not failed. It has become more precise. A century ago, Nefertiti could be made to vanish in year 12, die in an imagined epidemic, return as almost any anonymous mummy, or wait behind any unexplored wall. Each new fragment has narrowed that freedom. The year 16 quarry inscription keeps her alive as Akhenaten's great royal wife near the end of his reign. Feminine royal inscriptions make it plausible that a woman ruled as Neferneferuaten during the confused succession. Radar has weakened the claim that her tomb lies immediately behind Tutankhamun's burial chamber. DNA has placed the KV35 younger lady inside Tutankhamun's closest biological family without giving her Nefertiti's name. The mystery remains, but it no longer permits every answer. Several conclusions can be stated securely. Nefertiti was not simply a beautiful consort standing behind Akhenaten. She performed central ritual roles, occupied an exceptional place in royal imagery, and remained politically visible late in the reign. Her documented parents are unknown. Her name does not prove that she came from abroad, and nothing securely identifies her as the Mitannian princess Tadukipa. Her association with A and Te is significant but does not establish them as her biological parents. She had 6 named daughters, while no surviving inscription securely calls Tutankhamun her son. She may have become Pharaoh Neferneferuaten, but the identity is not proven and should not be confused automatically with Smenkhkare. No mummy is securely identified as Nefertiti. The younger lady is the most publicized candidate because the 2010 study proposed that she was Tutankhamun's biological mother. the full sister of the KV55 male, and a daughter of Amenhotep III and Queen Tiye. If the pedigree is correct and KV55 is Akhenaten, the woman was Akhenaten's sister as well as Tutankhamun's mother. Nefertiti is not documented in that genealogical position. Making the identification requires her to have been an otherwise unrecognized daughter of Amenhotep III and Tiye, who used neither the expected title king's daughter nor a secure title identifying her as Akhenaten's sister. That is possible within a damaged record, but possibility is not proof. The genetic pedigree itself deserves modern retesting. It was produced using STR markers amplified through PCR, and specialists raised concerns about degraded DNA, contamination, replication, and the difficulty of authenticating results from heavily handled Egyptian mummies. Later reviews continued to call the younger lady historically unidentified. Improved genome-wide sequencing could confirm the reported relationships with much greater confidence. If it does, the historical problem will become sharper rather than disappear. Science will know exactly where the younger lady belongs biologically, while Egyptology must still determine which royal daughter occupied that place. KV21A and KV21B remain important because they may belong to women of Tutankhamun's generation. KV21A has been proposed as Ankhesenamun, but the partial genetic data are insufficient for a secure identification. If Ankhesenamun were independently identified and a reliable mitochondrial genome recovered, she could provide a maternal line reference for Nefertiti. Meritaten or another securely named daughter could serve a similar function, yet a maternal match would still need to distinguish Nefertiti from sisters and other women in the same maternal family. DNA reduces uncertainty. It rarely removes the need for context. The most convincing identification would begin with archaeology, an undisturbed or well-documented burial bearing Nefertiti's name. Titles and relationship to Akhenaten would provide the ideal anchor. The body would need to match the period, biological sex, approximate age, and expected family relationships. Independent laboratories would recover authentic ancient DNA and reproduce the result. Imaging, inscriptions, burial equipment, and molecular evidence would all point toward the same woman. No single clue would carry the conclusion alone. A second path could begin with a securely identified relative. If one of Nefertiti's daughters were named through an intact burial or unambiguous inscription, genomic comparison could test anonymous candidates. A woman shown to be the daughter's biological mother, consistent in age and date, and placed within a royal Amarna context would create a strong case. The identification would become stronger if the same body also matched Akhenaten's known family through the relationship expected from historical reconstruction. Several independent lines would need to converge while leaving no equally plausible alternative. Epigraphy could change the mystery just as decisively as genetics. A newly recovered inscription might state that Nefertiti adopted the royal name Neferneferuaten. A recarved coffin could preserve enough of an earlier name and title to identify its first owner. Fragments from Amarna might connect a funerary object directly with her burial. Even a modest administrative text, like the year 16 graffito, could overturn an old narrative if its date and language were secure. History is sometimes restored not through a golden chamber, but through ink left by a worker in a quarry. Until such evidence appears, claims about Nefertiti's origin must remain separate from claims about anonymous mummies. Population genomes from other Egyptian sites cannot define her personal ancestry. The younger lady's proposed family cannot be transferred to Nefertiti, merely because the identification is attractive. facial reconstruction cannot prove that a skull belongs to the woman represented by the Berlin bust. A name meaning that the beautiful one has come cannot establish foreign birth. The scientific answer may be less dramatic than the promised revelation, but it is more honest. DNA has illuminated the family around Nefertiti's disappearance, not Nefertiti herself. This uncertainty does not diminish her historical importance. It reveals how unusual her age was. Nefertiti stood within a monarchy attempting to reorganize divine power, sacred landscape, royal imagery, and political memory at once. She may have helped govern that transformation, and may have attempted to carry it beyond Akhenaten's death. The restoration that followed dismantled the structures through which her authority had been expressed. Temples were broken into blocks, the capital emptied, burial goods reused, bodies transferred, and names omitted from official history. Her disappearance was not merely the loss of one tomb. It was the collapse of an entire system designed to make her visible. Science can still identify her. That possibility is real. Ancient DNA from Egypt has advanced from disputed fragments to genome-wide evidence under favorable conditions. Imaging can reveal details without opening wrappings. Proteins and isotopes can answer questions that DNA cannot. Digital tools can recover erased inscriptions and reunite scattered monuments. Archaeology at Amarna continues to refine the world in which she lived, but a responsible investigation must remain willing to end with uncertainty. A result does not become stronger because the name attached to it is famous. The Queen may already rest in a museum collection under a tomb number. She may remain within an undiscovered chamber in the cliffs. She may have been buried first at Akhenaten and later carried to Thebes. Her remains may have been lost beyond recovery. All four possibilities remain open. What can no longer be said is that DNA has revealed a terrible secret about her origin, or proven that the younger lady is Nefertiti. The evidence does not support that conclusion. The answer, for now, is quieter. Science has found relationships where history lost names. It has shown that anonymous bodies in the Valley of the Kings belong to a royal family once displayed beneath the Aegean. It has drawn lines between Amenhotep III, Tiye, KV35, the younger lady, and Tutankhamun. Somewhere near those lines, Nefertiti belongs. Her exact position remains unresolved because the bridge between molecule and name has not survived. And so the search returns to the desert, not in defeat, but with patience, at Amarna. Morning light still reaches the cliffs before it touches the old city below. The sun crosses the same empty plain where temples once opened their courts to the sky. Mud brick walls rise only a little above the sand. A road can be followed for a distance, then disappears beneath wind-blown dust. In abandoned rooms, fragments of painted plaster preserve colours that have outlived the people who mixed them. The royal family once filled this landscape with images of permanence. Akhenaten and Nefertiti stood beneath rays ending in small hands, receiving life from a sun that seemed to rise for them alone. Their names were carved into stone because stone was expected to resist forgetting. Yet the city emptied. The carvings were broken. The blocks travelled elsewhere and vanished inside later walls. What endured did so unevenly. A painted face survived in a workshop while a body lost its name. An inked quarry record preserved a queen's title while palaces fell silent. Molecules remained inside bone after genealogy disappeared from memory. The smallest traces proved more faithful than the grandest declarations. Perhaps one day a sequence, an inscription, and a burial will align, and the unnamed woman will be recognized. Perhaps Nefertiti will remain forever divided among images, titles, possibilities, and dust. History does not promise that every person can be recovered, even when that person once stood at the center of a kingdom. The light over Amarna softens toward evening. Shadows lengthen across foundations, workshops, and empty courts. Far beyond the river, the entrances of Theban tombs remain hidden among folds of stone. Between the abandoned city and those silent chambers lies the distance through which royal bodies, sacred objects, and human memories may have travelled. Nefertiti remains somewhere within that distance, not entirely lost, not securely found. Her face endures beneath its tall blue crown, composed and familiar, while the woman behind it waits beyond certainty. The sun lowers over the desert, the carved rays fade from the walls, and the ancient queen returns once more to the quiet edge between memory and forgetting.